that you could be prestigious, but of course played total havoc with the rhythm method. Neither Josh nor I had too much of an idea of other than textbook things of what to do about contraception, so he used condoms. I heard about it through discussions in the dorm, and you could buy it in the drugstore. We were very middle class, 1950s. Everything was planned. There was no spontaneous sex. You had sex at night in bed, but on one occasion in the fall, one of Joseph's apartment mates was away. We had a huge, beautiful bedroom, which had a beautiful view of the river. He also had the biggest bed. He was a swinger. He was an African too, but he was from another African country, and that's how everybody explained why David was such a swinger. He capitalized on his handsome foreignness. He had the bachelor's swinging pad with his huge bed and a mirror. Joseph and I had gone to dinner. I wish I could say we were drinking, but we hadn't been. We were kidding around. We went to David's room, and we started fooling around and fell into bed. We fell into his bed and had sex. My period did not come the next time. I must have told my friend right off, because now starts this really very poignant story. I was determined not to have the baby, but Joseph told me that it was my choice because he was ready to get married. He meant it. I was playing at it, not playing with him, but I realized when I got pregnant I was playing at it. This is what you were supposed to do. I liked the guy, but when he started talking about marriage and babies and stuff, I wasn't ready. I wanted to finish my education. I didn't want to be married when I got out of college. I didn't want to be a married student with a baby trying to finish up college for 2 years. I really couldn't imagine having a baby by this guy. I think I didn't want to go back to Africa to stay. I really didn't want to resolve the cultural conflicts with him. I think there was a lot of cultural prejudice as to why I didn't want an African kid. I didn't rationalize this. I heard it was really awful for black women who went to Africa as wives. The African women hated them, and the African men all thought they were whores and chased after them when their husbands weren't home. Joseph and I were very close. He was very paternal toward me anyway, because of culture and age, and now he was worrying me more than I was worrying myself. I was just trying to take care of business. He was on the phone every 3 hours, every day, every night. What did he used to call me? What was his nickname? His nickname for me was Mommy, even before I got pregnant, the way he used to say Mommy. He had a British accent. What are we doing? Now coming out of his culture, to be a mother is a very high compliment. He already perceived me as maternal, and then he met my mother, who was the classic mom. She starched underwear, she cooked everything from scratch, and she never wore pants a day in her life. He would get on the phone and I would be so hassled because I was just trying to deal with business and I would have to deal with his emotions. Has anything happened yet? When I first did out of my own naivety was to ask people in the dorms, friends, what can I do? I only remember one remedy. It has a memory for me to this day. Very hot baths and gin. To this day I can't stand the smell of gin. I must have tried that about 3 or 4 nights. It didn't work. I decided to ask my stepmother in Des Moines if she could help me. Now, my stepmother is a real meddling and involved lady. She knows everything about everybody, every place. She's still like that to this day. She's wonderful and horrible all at the same time. Anything you tell her that you need, she will get it. She knows how to do it. She is a manipulative, powerful, resource-building person. So I got her on the phone, not my mother. My mother had ambivalent feelings about women getting educated anyway, and she didn't quite know why my sister and I were going off and getting all this higher education. She would have been angry, and she probably would have put great pressure on me to get married and have the kid. So she never knew anything about any of it. My mother is dead now, and to this day, the fact that my stepmother knew and my mother didn't gives me great remorse and grief. So I told my stepmother I was pregnant and that I didn't want to have the baby. I wanted to finish school, and she says, fine, I'll call you back. In 2 hours, she called me back. She said, come to Des Moines this weekend. I said, how much will it be? I think she said $100. I felt nothing. I didn't feel anxious. I think I was stupid. No, I was not stupid. I think there's a part of me, either it's a survival mechanism or a character defect. Really, I'm serious. When I hear of what other people went through, I just want to take care of business. To say I was numb gives me more credit for being thrown out of joint by this thing. I think I was over-controlled. I just got on the train. Not only did I not think about the moral or ethical implications, I didn't think about the physical possibilities. Maybe I didn't know. Maybe I knew and just blocked it out. But I said, I'm going to go have this thing, and I'll be back to school on Monday. We must have had it done on a Friday night. I think she picked me up from the train station. We went to the poor section of town. I remember not seeing anyone, just looking straight ahead, and there were shadows to the side, and because it was still warm, there were people sitting out on the stoops and out on the steps. Now, I'm the daughter of a well-known man in our town, not to mention my stepmother. Whenever I saw these townspeople, I saw them as my father's daughter. They were renters of his apartments and frequenters of his pool hall. I was seen as so-and-so's daughter, so now that I'm going to going to this house where everybody knows there's an abortionist that has an apartment in the back, I was even more self-conscious. And my stepmother greeted everybody, and she just walked me through the door because everybody knows her. They just had to say hi. Nobody questioned, nobody said anything, but I think everybody knew. Why else would we be down there? She'd made preparations. She'd probably talked about it. It was in a first-floor flat, one of these frame houses that was broken up into apartments. It was a kitchen table, coat hanger abortion. It took maybe 6 minutes. I got on the kitchen table. I think my stepmother gave me a drink of brandy or something, and she said, "Now this may hurt a little bit." She held my hand, and this woman stuck a piece of coat hanger into my vagina. She stuck the coat hanger in, a piece that had been sterilized or whatever the hell she had done, and then my stepmother said, "Okay, now you get dressed." And what you were supposed to do was leave that in there until you started to abort, and then I left. I remember walking out with this coat hanger between my legs. I went back home to my father's house. That evening I started bleeding, and I think I was feeling cramps. Yes, I remember I had cramps, and my stepmother said, "Go to bed, need a bed." I remember her giving me a drink and giving me aspirin, and I went to sleep, and to me it was fine because it was better than I would do with my menstrual cramps. I got up very early in the morning and then went to the bathroom, and there was just this passage of blood and a clot that was slightly bigger than the clots I usually pass during my menstrual period. I realized that that was the fetus passing, and that I had taken as another blood clot was actually the abortion. I felt a little mixed then because it seemed like I should have done something at that moment. The next month my period came on time. The only trouble I have with it is somehow thinking I should have been more concerned. If for no other reason than for the physical reality. I could have died. I could have become sterile. All this terrible stuff could have happened. The more I think about it now, the more horrible I realize it was. When I read about people on the kitchen table, I say, I had one of those. But I was so blanked out, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. Back at school, I went to Planned Parenthood. First, I went to Woolworth's and bought a wedding ring for $2. I remember I told my friend, this is what I'm going to do. I think I'm going to get on the pill. Even though we didn't know what the pill meant at that point. So I bought the wedding ring in Woolworth's and went on down to Planned Parenthood and put my boyfriend's name down as my husband and put his address down as mine, and I got a diaphragm. I think it was rarer for black women to have chosen to have an abortion back in the bad old days. One reason people cite is that having a child enhanced a black woman's self-esteem, and they still like to talk about that stuff. I would suggest that another reason is because many black women didn't know where to find one. I happened to be in one of the so-called prestigious black families in town, so I knew how. If it was difficult for a white woman to find one, it was impossible for a black woman to find one, especially a poor black woman. I had friends in Des Moines who had babies at 12, 14, 16. Some of them are grandparents now. People did things like try to drink gin. By the time they'd tried all those wives' tales, they'd gotten to their 3rd or 4th month. Even if they found somebody by that time, none of the kitchen table abortionists would touch them. I was dating somebody who could hand me $100. Many poor black women were not in a relationship with a man who could have afforded that. So if abortions were illegal for white women, they were unknown for black women. They knew that Miss So-and-so did that, but they also knew at least 3 people who had gone to Miss So-and-so, and one who had died, and one who couldn't have any babies anymore. So they were scared off from that, and that's all they knew. I'm glad abortion is legal now because of the physical danger that people went through. I don't know if it changes how one is going to react emotionally. If my mindset is to do this because it's what I have to do, it's going to be the same whether it's legal or illegal. If one is ambivalent about whether it's the right thing to do, it's going to be the same whether it's legal or illegal. We hear a lot of women who go through great emotional agony, and I really sympathize and acknowledge the agony about their abortions. But at least having it legal takes away the physical stuff. I didn't feel that I had committed an irreversible crime, considering what that child's life would have been like if it had been born with an unhappy mother. I felt that I would not have been the best mother I could be. I have a son now. I think I'm a great mom, and I think he's a superior person because I chose to have him when I had him. He was the chosen child. I did not feel the child would have been getting the best if I had allowed him to be, and I didn't feel that a 4-week fetus had reached that being. So that made it easier for me because the child would have been black, and black kids don't get adopted. I would have been condemning my child to a life in an institution. I would not do that to a child. I think the child, when I put it in terms of God, understood why I was doing what I was doing. I was not ready to be a good mother. It was a mistake. I had not wanted to be a mom. If I had been casual and not used any contraception ever and had had been very casual about my sex, that's another thing I would have had to deal with. I thought that I'd attempted very seriously to have Planned Parenthood and had slipped up because of David's bedroom in that one wild moment. So I felt comfortable making this decision. I wanted to be an educated mom. I wanted to be a mom in a certain economic situation before the kid came. I wanted to be a mom who felt culturally comfortable with her kid, and so I have no guilt, and I still feel that I did the right thing. Anita. It was during the summer because it was warm. That's right, yes, it was warm weather. I went to a physician for a pregnancy test, and he told me, I guess I don't even remember, I was already close to 12 weeks. I asked him if he knew I wasn't in the position to have a child. Was there any place he knew I could get an abortion? He said no and canceled me to continue with the pregnancy. And that was that. That was my last contact with him. I went on to change gynecologists, and from then on, I've used women ever since. After I left the doctor's office, I was so upset. But it's like everything else, you deal with it. All I remember is hearing that I was pregnant, being upset by that. I do remember crying, not wanting to be in that position, and angry with myself for allowing it to have happened. I saw James that very night and told him, and we decided that this was not the time, nor were we in a position to get married and have the baby. He said he would find someone to do an abortion. I didn't know anybody. I didn't know what to do. It was a very new and frightening thing for me. I'm sure there were people that had abortions, but I didn't even ask. I wasn't in the position to sit down and discuss. This was when I first came to New York. I was here all by myself. I was living in the dorm, and the only person that I really became friendly with was Sally, who later became my roommate. We were new friends. I just did not feel comfortable sitting down and talking with her about it, and I don't think she could have handled it anyway. She wasn't together herself. Meanwhile, there was a doctor in Harlem who was doing abortions, and I got his name, I guess through James, and I went there. I drove down the street that he lived on, and there were a lot of these raunchy-looking people standing about outside, and of course here I am, this young girl. Whether they knew what was going on, I don't know, but I didn't have the guts. I just didn't have the guts to stop the car and go in. I just left. I rode down the street, and I looked, and I saw his office, and I left. I couldn't do it. I didn't go in the building. It was too scary. And then we found this woman. James found this gal who was, I'm not sure that she was a registered nurse. She had worked in a gynecologist's office. She may have been an aide, a nurse's aide. I met her before she did it, and she was really very nice. I felt very comfortable with her. I went and met her. It might have been in a diner or something like that. She lived in Harlem. I don't remember much else than that other than going to her apartment, and she had a lovely apartment. But going into Harlem alone was a very scary thing to do. But what happens is that you have no choice. This is your only choice. She was a lovely gal. She was very pleasant, and the apartment was clean. There were roaches, I remember. Being a roach, everybody had roaches in New York. It wasn't unusual. The scariest part was going up there, parking the car, going up into the apartment by myself. I can remember lying down in her bed in her bedroom facing out a window. There was a lot of light. She had a flashlight, and she put on rubber gloves she had washed. What she used had been sterilized. She boiled the catheter and inserted it and put in some saline, and that was it. I was there for maybe a couple of hours just to make sure that it was beginning to work. I left and I went back to James' place, and I aborted that night. I had a lot of cramps, but it wasn't excruciating pain. I was more frightened than anything else, and I think that maybe it was rough to go through not knowing what was happening. James was a strange guy in the sense that he had a lot of trouble dealing with my pain. I guess he really cared, and he just didn't know how to deal with it. At one point, later in the relationship, he drew some blood just to do a routine blood test for me, and he was a nervous wreck. He could not draw the blood. He was so upset by sticking a needle into my arm and drawing the blood that I had to have someone else come and do it. At the time I was having the contractions, I could see that he was upset, but he wasn't really very verbal. He tried to calm me down a couple of times because I was getting very excited. I remember crying, and he was very comforting. Finally, I aborted. James took care of it. He wrapped it up and put it down. Not a very pleasant experience. He paid her. I don't remember how much it was. Probably $100, I guess, something like that. But he certainly did not accompany me at any time. He was a doctor, and he didn't want to jeopardize his license or whatever. He didn't want to have any involvement that might reflect on him. Luckily, it worked out well. Luckily, I went to the kind of person I went to rather than to someone who was going to do a D&C and risk sticking the instrument right through my uterus. I felt very lucky. It was a very difficult situation at that time. It was 1964 and abortion was illegal, and who could you trust? And where were you going to get the support that you were looking for from someone else? If you confided in someone, were they going to support you and keep it quiet? and deal with it privately and not divulge what you had said? You didn't know. There were very few options for me at this time. D. The way I got pregnant was really social rape, I think you would call it, but I thought it was my fault. I was working and I became friendly with a group of people, and I went out with them a lot, but it was always like a gang going out. I sort of got paired with Johnny, and we spent a lot of time together, and I had no reason to feel or believe that he would force himself on me. We had gone out dancing and wound up at Johnny's apartment, and it was very late. The others left, and Johnny was supposed to drive me home, which he always did, but he decided not to. I thought it was my fault. I felt that I had been out, we had been dancing, fairly seductive dances, I thought, and I thought that I had aroused this passion in him. It was so uncontrollable. So I resisted, but it didn't matter. He pushed me down on that couch. So afterward, I was really worried and afraid because you lived with terror, and then I found out I was pregnant. When you got pregnant at that time, let's see, I was born in 1932, so it was 1952. I didn't go to a doctor to confirm whether or not I was pregnant. A girlfriend of mine had a doctor in Virginia she went to, so I went to him too. He gave me a shot. I guess it was a morning after shot. He said if you were not pregnant, it would bring on your period, and if you were pregnant, there was nothing anyone could do about it. It didn't work. It's so hard. I've never spoken about this to anybody, or certainly not in this detail. I was 20 when this happened. You see, Bob, the man I was in love with, was in the Army. I had been dating him since I was 15. I was very much in love, and we had been sexually active. Before he left, I wanted to have a more committed relationship, but he thought we should see other people. That's why I was going out with this group. When Bob came home on leave, I called and told him I was pregnant, and he was devastated. He was Catholic. He was full of tremendous contempt, and I certainly could understand a lot of why he was angry, but I felt abandoned. Way shaken with another, and I never told the truth of what happened. To say that you were raped to me was a very shameful thing, and also I didn't feel that I had been raped. In retrospect, I realized that's what happened, but then I thought that the only definition of rape was you were walking down the street and someone you didn't know accosted you or climbed in your window. If you knew someone and you wound up having intercourse with that person, it was the woman's responsibility. That was in the 30s and 40s when I was growing up, so it never dawned on me that I had been anything other than provocative and unfaithful. It never occurred to me to have an abortion. There was no place that you could go that was safe, that I knew of in the social strata that I was in. The only thing you knew were back alley stories. There was no place. There wasn't anything I could do about it. I think there were doctors who did it, but I didn't know how to find them, and nobody I knew did either, except my mother possibly, and she never said anything about it. Later on, there was a story. My father had died of cancer when my mother was pregnant, and she tells the story about going to Dr. Jenkins, who suggested performing an abortion on her. Dr. Jenkins performed abortions, but she never passed it on to me. I never, ever really verbalized that before. I told Johnny and my family, and everybody's solution was for us to get married. I was living at home. One night I was watching television, and Blossoms in the Dust came on. This was the story of a woman who got pregnant out of wedlock and decided to have her baby and not get married. There was a in Milwaukee where she went. This was a story I had heard all my life growing up. You would wind up working in the laundry or something like that to pay your way. They wouldn't let you come until you were in your 7th month, which meant that everyone would know your condition. Edna Gladney changed the laws in Texas to protect children who were born out of wedlock so that it did not say bastard on their birth certificate. And there was secrecy for the mother as well, so a woman could come and have that child and no one would know. The homes that the children went into were really lovely homes, and I called them. I was just 3 months pregnant, but I explained the circumstances. I desperately needed to come there, so they said, come on. I told my family, and they were totally hysterical. How could I give up the flesh of our family? There were giant scenes with Johnny pounding on the door, trying to get into the house, screaming it was his baby. I didn't have the fare to fly to Texas, and I had no way of getting there. I had pitted my will against the family, and they knew that I wasn't going to change my mind. So my brothers told me they would take care of the fare. I knew I would never be able to love that child the way it needed to be loved. I felt it was an innocent that didn't have anything to do with what was going on. So I went up to the Gladney home and spent 6 months of my life. It changed my life. It changed my self-image. The women who ran the Gladney home were so kind to me. There were, let's see how many of us. There was Judy and Elaine and Pat and Gwen. So the 4 of us, and also the others, Lydia and Irene. We all arrived within a 2 or 3 week period. It was dormitory style, and we were expected to find a conclave of horrors, and each of us would be the one nice person there. But what we found was each other. A handful of women abandoned by society in a bizarre place safe from the world. This was Fort Worth, Texas. I was lucky being in a place where you were cherished, feeling that you would be allowed back to your own life as a whole person. They did a wonderful thing because it prepared me to let go of that child. And wonderful things happened to me there. I began to think of myself as an intellectual. I was very beautiful when I was young, and I always saw that as a commodity because that was a value that was placed on women. I began to think of women with a kind of tenderness that comes from being part of a group of women who have been shown very clearly the vulnerability and helplessness of being a woman, and who have chosen within the structure of society to live a different way. Judy, who is still a good friend, has gone all the way through trying to find someone to do an abortion and had every story one could tell. With the exception of Judy and one older woman who had older children, all of us were there because of an experience that was to some degree against our will. For me to get away from my family and have people view me aside from being part of a family was wonderful. What changed my life was to really take charge of my life, and that was my story. I had the baby. It was a little boy. When I came home, I had a terrible experience going home. I missed my plane. The woman who made reservations told me it was 12 at night, and the plane actually left at 12 that afternoon. I couldn't get another flight out of Fort Worth days, and I needed to get out of there.
Would my fellow Missourian please field your question?
Yes.
Hello, my name is Katie Young, and I am a citizen of Missouri, and I go to school in Columbia, and I am here to talk about why we need to protect women's health, and I feel it's very important that we take care of women, men, people of all genders equally and respectfully, and this is very important to me, and it's very important that we stand up for these issues here at the Capitol today. I'm going to read something out of Behind Every Choice is a Story by Gloria Felt. It's called The Real Sexual Revolution and Its Biological Antecedents. Let's face it, we're not all going to be celibate during the years between puberty and marriage. In fact, few of us will be. Throughout most of human history, puberty and marriage happened about the same time, in the mid to late teens. Thanks to improved nutrition and healthcare, puberty now usually occurs in the preteen years. And due to the need for more and more education in order to make it in our complex society, marriage is delayed until the mid-20s. That gives the average woman and man 13 years of physical maturity between puberty and marriage. The advent of the birth control pill in 1960 profoundly changed the gender power balance by allowing women to control their own fertility effectively, pick and choose their partners, and choose to marry or not. The freedom of separating sex from procreation, traditionally granted only to men, marked the true sexual revolution. But this revolution is about much more than sex. It places women on an equal footing with men for education, employment, and other life aspirations. That's why it is possibly the most significant advance in social justice and women's health in human history. The timing of puberty, marriage, and childbearing has changed, but that doesn't mean that attitudes have kept pace. All too often, rational discussions of sex and sexuality are drowned out by the strident voices of those who fear anything that allows women to act with moral autonomy. And those voices are not just male voices. This culturally ingrained hostility to women won't go away by itself. Some women even want the benefit of gender equality without the burden of the battles that have brought us this far. That's why we still hear jelly women statements like, "I'm not a feminist, but..." Putting the jelly woman aside, a new look in my eye. Somewhere through the early adult years, I hope, most of us do put aside jelly woman, who knows only how to be swept away and gain the inner strength that allows us to make our own decisions about having sex, or not, with whom and for what reasons. The first thing to sex is having that talk with your partner. If that doesn't work out, it probably won't work out in bed either. Those are the words of Lori, age 24. The words of Estelle, age 35, go as follows. I became an advocate for reproductive choice because growing up, I saw that being able to control my fertility was the first step in having control over my life. By controlling if and when to have children, I could determine whether I lived a life that would be better than my parents, or whether it would be marred by poverty, unfulfilled ambitions, and a limited education. I grew up in the neighborhood of Washington Heights in New York City, which was, and still predominantly, Dominican and poor. Growing up as a Dominican-American woman, it was drilled into me that being a wife and mother was the sole purpose of my existence. But I knew that if I were to thrive instead of merely survive, I needed to focus on getting an education. All of my life, I grew up watching girls as young as 12 and 13 have babies, dropping out of school, barely surviving on welfare, only to watch their own children repeat the same history. It disturbed me to see that so many bright and funny girls become young women struggling to raise their children and taking their frustration out on them, not for lack of they're so utterly ill-equipped to handle the stress of raising their children with such limited resources. My own aunt was 14 when she had her first child. By the time she was 25, she had had 4 children, one of which was born prematurely because she had developed an addiction to heroin while she was in utero. Out of these 4 children, one has served time in prison, one became a teen parent herself, one has significant developmental problems, and one is successful. My aunt died of AIDS at the age of 43. I miss her, and I often wonder how her life might have turned out, and the life of her children, if she had been informed of the reproductive options in her life and encouraged to use them. I believe that it has been the constant reminder of watching these young women struggle, and the memory of my aunt's life that has motivated me to become so vocal about reproductive choice, and motivated me to finish my